Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today, we begin Little Blue Book number 1008, and it is titled The Origin of Religion, written by Joseph McCabe. Now, you notice, running theme, Joseph McCabe writes most of the books concerning religion for this series of Little Blue Books. And this one is copyrighted 1926. So this one was written in 1926. And we have, let's see, 6 chapters. Chapter 1 is What Religion Revealed. Was Religion Revealed? 2 is Modern Theories of Its Origin. 3, The Real Roots of Religion. 4, How Gods Were Made. 5, The Rise of Priesthoods. And 6, The Psychology of Religion. All in total, 56 pages. All right, well, let's dive into it right away. As you can see, the book is already falling apart just by opening it. So I'm not going to pre-read this one. So you just have to bear with me. All right, here we go. The Origin of Religion. Chapter 1, Was Religion Revealed? 16 centuries ago, there was a simple-minded father of the church, Firmicus Maternus by name, who wrote a book called The Errors of the Profane Religions. It is the most valuable book that a stupid man ever wrote. Our modern scholars have great difficulty in learning the real doctrines and practices of the religions of the Roman world in the first few centuries of the Christian era. They were suppressed by law when Christianity was established, and Christian writers, for good reasons, do not tell us much about them. But Firmicus was not a diplomatist. He sat down to write all that he knew about the pagan religions, and we get very valuable information from his pages. Firmicus was very much disturbed, and if parts of his book were translated and published, a good many simple Christians would be disturbed. He found that many of these pagan religions of the Roman world had saviors or redeemers. He learned that every year the birth of these gods were celebrated, often in midwinter, and every year, often about the time of our Easter, the death and resurrection of the gods were celebrated. He discovered that in some of these religions, we shall see all this in later books. Bread and wine were used at the altar, and candles and incense and sacred water were part of the ritual. Poor Firmicus concluded that the devil had revealed or inspired these things to the pagan nations before Christ was born, in order to spoil the success of the Christian church when it should be founded. The devil has his Christs, he exclaimed. What it all really meant, we shall see later. It is part of the study of evolution. Creeds and legends and rituals have evolved just as stars and flowers have evolved. But until this wonderful discovery of evolution was made, about the middle of the 19th century, the work of creation was divided between God and the devil. All good things, especially all true religion, came from God. All evil things, especially false beliefs, came from the devil. Man, of himself, was a poor little mannequin, not capable of doing much, either good or evil. We now have a science of religion, just as we have a science of rocks and atoms, of bodies and of minds. The common idea that science deals with material things and religion with spiritual things is very far astray. One of the best-known sciences in America is the science of the mind, psychology. Is the mind a material thing? Then we have a science of aesthetics, or of the sense of beauty, a science of ethics, or of the moral sense. a science of sociology, and so on. Science merely means the accurate and critical study of anything that exists. Religion is a fascinating subject for scientific study, and we now have scores of learned experts studying the origin and development of religion. As this series of little blue books is concerned with religion, it is proper and useful to begin, after the general survey of religious controversy which I give in The Revolt Against Religion, with a careful study of the origin and early evolution of religion. Later booklets will deal with the great modern religions and will show the place of Christianity in the continuous stream of religious evolution. Religion has had for ages, certainly for tens of thousands of years, so large and commanding a part in the life of man that it is a most fitting subject for a scientific study. What a drama! What an epic! It will seem to the student of a later age if, as I think, humanity is just now outgrowing all religion. I wish. Take the savage tribes which put before us today a vivid picture of what all men were a few thousand years ago. Religion dominates and absorbs them even more than sex. All their hopes and fears center around the rude temple and the native priest. Then man became civilized, and of all the great cities that they built, little remains today but the ruins of their temples. It is the temples of Egypt, the temple mounds of Babylonia, the Parthenon of Athens that we go to see. The cathedrals of the Middle Ages survive in all their splendor, while the homes of those who built them crumbled into dust ages ago. So much men did for the gods, so little for themselves. Now the church is lost in the forest of masonry of our great cities, and tomorrow, will the idea that has so stupendously filled the hearts of and life of men for ages pass away forever? This is far more worth studying than the rhythm of a poet or the bones of a bat. It is particularly important to study it at the outset of an inquiry into religion for two reasons. First, most of the writers on the science of religion or comparative religion are too timid. They seem always to be apologizing to the world for applying the scientific spirit to so sacred of a thing as religion. Please understand, they say at every turn, that we pass no opinion on the truth or value of religious beliefs. Cotton off. The reader may please himself. I am going to collect such facts as are available to throw light on the origin and early development of religion. But it seems to me ridiculous to say that this has no bearing on the truth of religion. If we discover why men first began to believe in a soul, a spirit world, and a hierarchy of gods in the spirit world, we make a discovery of same practical importance. For men's beliefs are worth just as much as their reasons for believing. Secondly, the scientific expert on religion has a way of ignoring the beliefs of hundreds of millions of people as if they did not exist. Nothing which is not intellectually respectable exists for him, and it is, in his opinion, not intellectually respectable to believe that religion was revealed to the human race. But these little booklets are written for a practical purpose. They meet the inquiries or enable others to meet the inquiries of the millions. They despise no belief. They give the knowledge which will correct it. Hundreds of millions of people still believe that all religion was revealed. They think that the savage is a degenerate who has perverted and distorted the primitive religion of God, revelation of God. The facts which we will give ought to interest and help these people. But how can we give any positive information about the origin of religion if, as evolution teaches, it arose in the minds of men tens of thousands of years ago? How can we say so empathetically that religion was not revealed, but grew out of small germs of emotion and speculation in the hazy mind of primitive men? The religious opponent of science and evolution is apt to be very scornful about what scientific men say, because he knows only the conclusions and not the methods of the scientist. His amusement is, in any case, very much misplaced. Fundamentalist writers who hold up science to ridicule are really making themselves ridiculous. What? The men who gave us steam and electricity, whose work is the basis of all our wonderful chemistry and textile work, who have measured the universe and doubled the average duration of human life, these men can be made sport of by a handful of pamphleteers and preachers with very poor training and very ordinary mental power? Is it likely? Is it not more likely that they are misunderstood and misrepresented? The writer of this kind of literature generally replies that he acknowledges all our debt to science on the material side. There, he says, science deals with facts. What he ridicules is the scientific man who deserts facts and piles speculation upon speculation about other than material things, about religion, for instance. Now, when a scientific man tells you that he believes or does not believe in God or Christ, this objection holds good. He is leaving his scientific territory. He knows no more than any intelligent and educated person knows about it. But when he deals with evolution, or the nature of moral law, or the development of religion, he is dealing with facts, and his methods are just the same as when he measures the distance of the sun and planets. He first collects the facts and then interprets them. If science merely collected facts, we should still be waiting for the wonderful chemistry and medicine and surgery, the electric appliances and means of transport and million comforts of modern times. The origin of religion is a very good illustration. The first vague religious ideas or feelings entered the mind of man ages ago. Now, things that happened ages ago are apt to leave traces behind them, and we may discover these traces. As everybody knows, prehistoric man has left behind him millions of his flint implements, and these give us the measure of his intelligence. At once you see that it is quite possible to get positive knowledge, even of a state of mind of 50 or 100,000 years ago. But we find no trace of religion in all that primitive man has left us. About 20,000 years ago, man began to carve figures in ivory and stone, and some of these may be of a religious character. In any case, they buried their dead and sometimes put their stone implements and shell ornaments around the body, a fairly clear proof that they thought that the man had gone to the happy hunting ground. But this is not the beginning of religion. We must try another way. Evolution does not in the least mean that every living thing goes on evolving. It is only when their conditions of life change that animals or plants need to change. It is the same with human beings. Put a race of men in an island like Australia and keep out all higher competitors, and there is no need for them to make progress. There is no stimulation to advance. And from the beginning of its history, the human race has been throwing off these side branches into isolated regions. There they generally remain unprogressive. And we pick them up today, and so learn what the race was like when they fell out of the march 10, 50, or 100,000 years ago. This method of obtaining information will be important in more than one of these booklets, and I will illustrate it from the population of America. On the whole, before the Spaniards came, it was a Red Indian, or Amerindian, population. Never heard that word before. Amerindian, A-M-E-R-I-N-D. But there were explanations like the very lowly Yagans of the island of Terra del Fuego and certain tribes in the forest of Brazil. So there were two waves of migration, an earlier and a later, from Asia into America. The Indians, with their superior weapons, pushed the crude earlier population south or into the forest, just as the arrivals from Europe displaced the Indians. The first invaders were part of the human family of tens of thousands of years ago. To put it very moderately, and they show us what primitive man was like and how he thought and felt and behaved. The Indians showed us man at a much later date. The European shows a still higher stage. Evolution has thus thrown a light for the first time on what we call savage races and their great variety of degrees of culture. We study them all over the world and rearrange them in the order of their culture and intelligence. As we pass up this order from the lowest to the highest, we get almost the whole story of the development of man's ideas and institutions. It enables us to study the evolution of moral and religious and political ideas, just as it shows us the development of weapons from stone to bronze to iron, of art, of clothing, of houses, and so on. This is how we find a basis of positive fact for a study of the origin of religion. What the savage is thinking today, carefully cutting out what he has learned by contact with the whites, the entire race thought long ago. What the very lowest savages are thinking today, the whole human race thought in its infancy. Let us see what light this throws on the origin of religion. It began in something very different from a revelation. That's the end of chapter 1. And I have cotton mouth, so. And we'll take a hit. "17 minutes in." No, that was a terrible one. That was a much better hit. Okay. No. See. It's a repeat process. All right, chapter 2. Modern theories of its origin. The method we have described is evidently very promising and interesting. For instance, if you want to know how men shaved before there were safety razors, how they wrote before they had paper and fountain pens, how they plowed before the modern steel machines were invented, you follow the same method. You go to backward nations. I have seen Bulgarians plowing with a cow's horn in the end of a pole, and when they could write, using a quill pen and inkhorn. So with illuminates and everything else. Then you go to Africa and find a still earlier level. Next, you may go to Australia, where men neither write nor shave nor plow. There you find stone knives and windscreens instead of houses. But there is a still earlier level in Terra del Fuego, and Ceylon in the Philippines. I don't know, the Philippines were that primitive back in 26. In studying the development of religious ideas, you must be very careful that you begin at the lowest human level. "Oh yes," says the critic, "I know this scientific procedure. You look for the tribes with the crudest religious ideas, and you say that these are, of course, the earliest level, because their ideas are so crude. And then you say that religion began very crudely, because you have found the earliest level." This is precisely what we do not do. In making my study of the origin of religious ideas, which I have personally investigated and on which I have written a substantial book, The Growth of Religion, written in 1918. I have to look that one up. I'm going to pause. Okay, there we go. I wrote it down. All right, here we go. I continued. I consulted one of the leading ethnologists of Europe, my friend Professor Hudden, as to which, on quite general grounds, are the lowest human peoples today. The result will be seen in the next chapter. But sometimes writers speculate on the origin of religion without following this strict procedure, or without taking care to begin at the lowest level. In consequence of this, we have different theories on the origin of religion. Most of these have now only an historical interest, but it will be useful to have a short account of them. What is religion? And what is the exact meaning of the word religion? It is more difficult to answer these questions than to say how religion arose ages ago. To begin with the word itself, it belongs to the very earliest period of the Latin language, and even the Roman writers of the civilized periods had lost the meaning of it. Very often it is said to come from the word bind, ligre, or religre, and so it is presented as meaning what binds man to the gods. But in that case, the word would be religiation, not religion. And we must try again. It means to be connected with the Latin word for call or select. But what it really meant to the men who first used it, we cannot tell. We know well what we mean today, but the difficulty is that we do not all mean the same thing. So many people nowadays wish to keep the word religion, although they do not believe in God. That all kinds of new definitions are current. Professor Liuba, never heard that one, Liuba gives 50 different definitions in his psychological study of religion. Mr. H.G. Wells, wanting to write a chapter about me in his God the Invisible King, wrote me, "What is your religion, McCabe? Or rather, what is your religiosity?" "Every man has a religiosity," I replied that I had not. "It seems to me that the word religion ought to mean always the belief in and worship of gods." However, very many people now wish to use the word in much the same sense as idealism or reverence for any high ideals. Here I take the word in its commonly accepted meaning, the belief in God and immortality, and the practices inspired by these beliefs. I am glad to be able to agree for once with my fundamentalist friend. Certainly every reader will know that in its origin and early stages of which I write, religion was not what the modern refined idealists mean. There were plenty of skeptics, and there were evolutionists in ancient Greece and Rome, and they seem to have speculated as to how man came to believe in gods. The Roman poet Lucretius perhaps gives us their general sentiment when he says, "Fear was the first thing on earth to make gods." He seems to have imagined the prehistoric savage cowering before the crash of thunder, the roar of the storm, the blaze of the volcano, the chaos of an angry sea, and even the fierceness of the crocodile or the tiger. In the 19th century, when evolution again became a living thought, many speculations were published about the origin of religion. Boy, I don't know why. There. Much discussed at one time was a theory of the great expert on languages, Max Muller, that religion was due to a sort of disease or decay of language. The early Hindus, he said, talked much in their poetry of the sun and moon, of fire and water, and so on. They regarded them merely as elements of nature, but later Hindus misunderstood the meaning of their fathers. They took these conspicuous elements of nature to be deities and worshipped them. This theory rests on too narrow a basis and is not now followed by any man. Next, Herbert Spencer, the great evolutionary philosopher, published a theory on the origin of religion. It began, he said, with a belief that a man's shade survived the death of the body, and as the chief remains a chief or ruler even in the world of shades, famous chiefs came to be honored, flattered, and appeased as gods. Grant Allen, in his work The Evolution of the Idea of God, follows much the same theory, and he quotes a very large amount of material from the life of African tribes to prove it. But before Grant Allen took up the theory, it had been generally displaced by a new theory conceived by one of the most famous anthropologists, Sir E.B. Tylor, Primitive Culture, 1877. This theory is known as animism. Just as stars are only gradually formed out of loose, diffused cosmic dust or fire mist, so Tylor thought the belief in definite spiritual persons, souls, and gods must have been preceded by a vaguer and more nebulous belief. Nature generally must have been supposed by primitive man to have an animating spirit. This vague general animation was, in the course of time, gathered into separate and definite personalities. The gods and goddesses of sky and sun and moon, of fire and water, the spirits of the trees, the fountains, the animals, and so on. More recent writers think that Tylor's general animism was not the first stage. There was, they say, a vaguer and earlier stage, which they call pre-animism. The germ of religious belief was man's awe in the presence of the mighty and mysterious movements surrounding him in nature. He did not at first personify these forces, and did not even think of a general animation of nature or world soul, as Dr. Brighton supposes in his Religions of Primitive Peoples. It was just an emotional attitude or reaction, without reasoning. The best books presenting this theory of religion, which is widely held, are perhaps R.R. Moret's Threshold of Religion and Professor J.T. Stotwell's Religious Revolution of Today. The feeling of the Melanesian natives seems to correspond with this theory and is much quoted in support of it. Irving King, The Development of Religion, points out that the American Indians had a corresponding feeling, and he supports the theory from that side. This is the general trend of speculation on the origin of religion, though there are various separate theories. The phallic theory, that is, arose out of sex emotions, will be considered in a later booklet. Dr. L.R. Farnell, a distinguished authority on the science, thinks that primitive man's horror of bloodshed and death led on to religion. Evolution of religion. M.E. Crawley, another authority, thinks that it sprang rather from man's general attitude toward life, the tree of life. Others start from early Greek religion and think Mother Earth, the first to inspire religious feeling. Some, in fine, like Professor Lubia, one of the leading American experts on religion, think that there were many different roots of religion, not one, and combine all the theories. The psychological study of religion. Those who wish can read the works I have quoted, but I would wish to make one or two general reflections on these theories. Some readers will at once exclaim, "Ah, the usual thing!" Scientific guesses succeeding in annihilating each other every decade. Now, the answer to this common remark is, as a rule, that successive scientific theories do not annihilate, but correct, complete, and expand each other. The first theory is too broad or too narrow. We find new facts and correct it. In any case, the remark is really foolish, because theories which were advanced 50 years ago, when our knowledge was still very imperfect, have had to be abandoned. It is absurd to say that the theories formed at the present time, when our knowledge of facts is 10 times as great, are just as likely to be suspended. Superseded. Suspended. And at first it looks as if we have here only a normal case of the evolution of a theory. Max Muller's theory was never widely received. It was just a first guess nearly a century ago. Spencer's theory, as far as it goes, is sound, but Tylor traced, or thought he traced, an earlier psychological stage in the evolution of ghosts and gods. and the pre-animists only profess to find a still earlier stage. The theory is successively enlarged or built up. But I'm going to try to show that Spencer was, on the whole, right, and that the animistic and pre-animistic stages did not precede the belief in a definite soul or double. Speculation on this subject is difficult and dangerous. The modern scholar has to try to put himself in the mental attitude of the savage, to see how the savage mind would react upon the daily experiences of savage life. He cannot do it. He imagines fine shades of psychological development which are modern rather than primitive. Cottonmouth break. The best way is to go to the lowest savages and learn what they actually think and feel about religion. But one has to be very careful to begin at the beginning, to start from the lowest level of mental life, the lowest savage type that is known to us. This is very rarely done. In the days of Herbert Spencer, it could not be done, as our knowledge of lower peoples was still very imperfect, and the arrangement of them according to their culture and development was far from satisfactory. It was still unsatisfactory in the days of Sir E.B. Tyler, and the dates from which he started are not quite primitive. Grant Allen builds almost entirely on the religious ideas of the Bantu tribes of Africa, and they are very far from being at the lowest level of humanity. More recent students start from the Melanesian or New Guinea, and we are still not at the lowest level. Others build much on the Australian Aborigines, and here again we are not at the lowest level. This is, I think, the defect in the theory of one of the greatest living writers on comparative religion, Sir J.G. Fraser, the Golden Bough. He thinks that magic preceded religion. Men tried at first to coerce the powers or elements of nature by magical practices. When they became intelligent enough to see that they failed, they imagined personal powers behind the vegetation and the storm and began to worship and placate them. A high French authority, Solomon Wright, thinks that the use of taboo was a stage earlier than magic. With all respect for these distinguished authorities, I feel that they have speculated too much and have taken their facts from tribes which do not show the lowest level of human development. When my book, which does thus begin from the lowest human level, appeared a few years ago, an expert wrote that we know too little about the obscure peoples I chose to be able to reason from their sentiments. We know too little about the obscure peoples I chose to be able to reason from their sentiments. This is untrue. We shall see that in most cases we have volumes on them by scholars of high repute, and no scholar questions that they are the lowest fragments of humanity. It will surely be of interest to see what religion, if any, they have. And I think we'll stop there for part 1. We'll pick up in part 2 of chapter 3, the real roots of religion. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next video of Reading Little Blue Book.